Smart. I am Trish Regan. A lucrative criminal empire supports Islamic State, making it one of the world's richest terror groups. The Treasury Department estimates Islamic State brings in $1 million a day. But how do you cut off funding to a group that is said to be largely self-sufficient? Joining me with some ideas, Republican Representative Sean Duffy of Wisconsin. He's a member of the House Financial Services Committee that held a hearing today on this very issue. Representative Duffy, what are some of the ways that we can go about cutting off Islamic State's funding?
Well, Trish, as you mentioned, they bring in revenue of $1 million a day, but some have said they have up to $2 billion of reserves. And so what we talked about today was how is Treasury partnering with other global partners to break up their finance network? If we can cut up the finances of ISIS, we can actually undermine their ability to use the money that they bring in off the black market, off of oil. And I got to tell you what, in the hearing, I was not very pleased with what I heard from Treasury. It was a lackluster effort. It's kind of the same focus that the administration has put on with actually destroying ISIS itself, whether it is the limited airstrikes, which has been less than what George Bush has done and Bill Clinton had done, and again, it was lackluster. So, but Trish, what I think came away, my takeaway from the hearing was this. You have most of the money coming from oil sales on the black market.
Right.
And you have trucks of oil that are leaving wells and refineries. I mean, we can see it from the air. Why aren't we blowing up these trucks of oil that'll totally shut down their revenue stream and their ability to finance themselves? And there's no good answer for that. And I think the administration has to look at all the tools that are on the table for them to defeat and destroy ISIS.
I'll tell you, Senator McCain was on here in New York with me the other day, and we were talking about Islamic State and how exactly to address this. Of course, as you well know, he is very much a proponent of sending more troops there and really embracing this situation head on. Is that the answer? Do we need to be doing more? We can't rely on people there in the community to try and lead this effort. It needs to be a U.S.-led effort to destroy Islamic State?
Well, I do think it has to be a U.S.-led effort, and I think we have to keep all options on the table. Not that we have to use every option, but for the president to come out and talk about all the things he will not do, I think that just sets up your enemy to navigate their battlefield consistent with the limitations we put on our engagement. And so I do think we need, especially special forces, on the ground with this engagement if we're going to be successful in defeating them. And if you look over the last 3 months since the president has truly engaged, which I think has been too little too late, he hasn't been successful. They haven't been brought back. They've actually expanded and grown their territory. Their influence is greater, and they're inspiring jihadists from around the world to join their ranks and help them fight. I mean, this is a scary situation, and so I think at all components, the president has failed.
Representative Duffy, I do want to ask you about the Keystone Pipeline. The vote is expected tomorrow there in the House. Tell us a little bit about the sort of environment surrounding this vote and what we can anticipate next from the Senate.
Well, in the House, this is nothing new. We've been supporting the Keystone Pipeline. We've had several votes. We're going to do it again. The Senate has been something different. They have been unwilling to take up the Keystone Pipeline. Now that Mary Landrieu is in danger of losing her seat in Louisiana, they've found a new interest in the Keystone Pipeline because a lot of jobs in Louisiana come from the energy sector. I think, though some Democrats and Democrat analysts have been calling the American people stupid, Louisianans are smart, and they'll realize that this is just a political ploy from Mary Landrieu to try to bring the Keystone Pipeline to the forefront to save her job, even though she hasn't been very concerned about
if it gets through the Senate,
Louisiana.
That's good news for you guys. So, you know, regardless of the motivation, et cetera, where does it then go from there? It would go to the president. Do you anticipate that he would veto this?
Well, I know that Mary Landrieu has put some pressure on him. I have a hard time seeing the president going against his liberal environmental base and signing that legislation that comes from the House and the Senate. However, if he vetoes it, it should get back in time to the House and the Senate for a veto override. And I think it'll be interesting what happens there, which would happen before the Louisiana election.
We're getting word that the president may issue an executive order on immigration as soon as next week. What's your reaction to that, Representative Duffy? I mean, I know that there is some concern that executive orders are not the way you want to go about changing something so important as immigration. Rather, you might want to work with lawmakers there on Capitol Hill to get it done first.
First of all, I think the American people want to see Congress and the president work together. If the president uses executive action on immigration, I think it is going to create a lot of bad will between Republicans and Democrats and with the administration. What I would hope the president would do is say, listen, there is a bipartisan effort on both sides of the aisle to secure the border, to actually deal with those who've come here without legal status, to deal with our dreamers, but to do it the right way. And if the president does it on his own, I think it's going to be a bad sign for collaboration and cooperation between the two parties looking forward. Well, and, you know, frankly, this is not a top issue for most Americans. We're talking about the economy and jobs and energy independence and ISIS and Ebola. And if the president's going to now talk about immigration at a time when Americans are focused on something else, I think that's a diversion tactic.
But I would argue that immigration is an important issue actually for both parties because it represents a very large voting bloc come 2016.
No, it is, but most Americans who are out there today are concerned about other issues. Let me bring up one other point on that, though. If you look at the Dreamers, the young kids who came here no fault of their own, they're not legal. Marco Rubio in the Senate was working on a bipartisan bill that would have addressed the fate of Dreamers. The president saw that, and instead of working with the Senate and Republican Marco Rubio, he jumped ahead of them with DACA, deferred action for these young kids, making sure Republicans didn't have a win. Listen, it's not a Republican win or a Democrat win. It's an American win if we can figure out immigration. And I think the president sees all policy through the lens of politics. And I think we have to look at it through the lens of what is good policy for our country and for our citizens.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Representative Sean Duffy. Good to have you. Coming up next, everyone, a new report suggests